My name is Matilda. I'm 24 years old. And this is the story of the night I walked out of my parents' house, barefoot, holding nothing but a small pouch with $2 crumpled inside. While my sister smiled in the driveway, climbing into the brand new BMW they gave her as a graduation gift. It wasn't just a car. It was the last nail in a coffin they'd been quietly building for years. I don't expect you to understand why someone like me would just vanish without warning, but by the time you're halfway through this story, you'll know. And by the time you reach the end, you'll wonder how I kept it all buried for so long. Because the truth is, I didn't leave that night to escape. I left to begin. Growing up, I wasn't poor. Not in the way people define poverty. I had food, a roof, clothes, a school to attend. But that's not what makes someone rich, or safe, or loved. I had a family. A father who spoke in lectures instead of conversations. A mother who calculated affection like it was part of a budget. And a sister Lena who walked through life like she'd already been told she was the chosen one, the golden one, and maybe she had. Alina is 2 years younger than me, but even at 10, she walked with the kind of confidence you don't find in little girls, unless someone's feeding it to them daily. At 13, I was invisible. Not bullied, not abused, not starved, just ignored. Unless, of course, I slipped up when I won first place in the regional science fair in 8th grade. I came home beaming, the trophy in my hand, expecting at least a well done. Instead, my mother said, "Did Alina eat her lunch today?" She said she wasn't feeling well this morning. When I got my first part-time job at the bookstore on Main Street, they didn't ask how it was going. But when I worked on Elena's resume, a year later, my dad said, "Finally, something useful from you." It was a pattern, not a moment. A slow leak in the ceiling that eventually caves in. I didn't cry about it. I didn't scream. I just learned. Learned to fold disappointment into silence. Learned to clap for Alina, louder than anyone else, because if I didn't, it was considered jealousy. Learned that sometimes the best way to disappear is to smile and nod. After high school, I got a full scholarship to a state university 3 hours away. I moved out with a single suitcase, a used laptop, and no phone call from my parents after they dropped me off. Alina, meanwhile, was entering her senior year of high school, and she was already visiting Ivy League campuses. It was during that first semester at college that I started therapy. Our campus had free sessions if you booked them early. My therapist, a tired-eyed woman named Dr. Remy, said something to me in our third session that I've never forgotten. "Matilda, you're not unloved, you're strategically neglected." I remember blinking at her, not understanding. She continued. "Strategic neglect is what happens when a family chooses a scapegoat. You've been assigned that role. It's not random, and it's not your fault, but it is real." I laughed, actually laughed, because when someone puts into words what you've spent your whole life trying not to admit, it doesn't feel like validation. It feels like an ambush. For 4 years, I stayed mostly away. I visited home once, briefly, for Elena's high school graduation. They threw her a garden party. Hired a violinist. My name was spelled wrong on the cake. I stood in the corner in a plain dress I bought second-hand. Alina wore a custom gown. I gave her a leather journal with her name engraved on the spine. She barely looked at it. My dad gave her diamond earrings. My mom gave her a credit card. I gave her thought, and she gave me a hug without eye contact. The next few years passed in quiet rebellion. I got my degree in sociology, moved in with a roommate, worked part-time at a nonprofit, saved every penny, took free online classes in digital design, spent my nights building a freelance portfolio, and my weekends volunteering at a domestic violence shelter. I wasn't trying to be a saint. I was trying to build a life where I didn't have to need them. And I succeeded until the wedding. It was Elena's wedding. She was 22, fresh out of college, engaged to a man named Christopher, who came from money, and smiled like he'd never had to earn anything. They were getting married at an upscale vineyard. Every inch of the invitation screamed exclusivity. Ivory embossed paper, golden thread, a wax seal with their initials. I wasn't invited, no explanation. Just omitted. But 2 weeks before the wedding, Elena texted me. A single message. Hey, Mom wants you to come to the wedding. Don't make it weird. Don't make it weird. As if I was the one who chose silence all these years. As if I was the problem. I didn't reply. I just showed up. I arrived the night before the wedding. Suitcase in hand, heart steady. The house was full of noise and champagne. Elena's friends wore silk robes. My mother opened the door and looked genuinely surprised to see me. You made it, she said. Not a hug, not a smile, just the same tone she might use to greet a plumber. I slept in the guest room, alone, at breakfast the next morning. Elena didn't say a word to me. Her nails were being done. Her skin was glowing. She looked like someone about to ascend. My father walked in and dropped an envelope on the table in front of me. For you, he said. Inside were 2 crisp $1 bills. I looked up at him, confused. For your card, he said. Everyone's giving a little something to the bride and groom. That was the moment. That moment, $2 in an envelope, that split something inside me, clean in two. I smiled, nodded, folded the envelope back neatly, and tucked it into my bag, and I waited. I didn't sleep the night before the wedding. Not because I was anxious. Because I was planning. See, when someone spends years ignoring you, underestimating you, forgetting you exist, they forget that you're watching, listening, recording. Every slight, every comment, every gesture. And what they don't realize is that the quiet one, she knows everything. At dawn, I put on a plain sky blue dress. Not flashy, not forgettable, just present. I braided my hair loosely, pinned it back, and wore no makeup. I wanted them to see me. Not some filtered version. Not some dolled-up accessory to Elena's day. The venue was stunning, of course. A private vineyard with chandeliers hanging from trees, strings of lights, and a live harpist. Elena looked like a magazine cover. And everyone else, they looked like her entourage. When I arrived at the ceremony space, my mother pulled me aside. Her voice was tight, brittle. Please don't make this about you today. Don't draw attention. Just blend in, okay? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She had no idea. The ceremony began. Guests whispered and smiled. The music played. Christopher stood at the altar in a designer tux. His expression, smug. And then Elena appeared. Gasps, cameras, applause. She walked down the aisle like she owned the world, and maybe she thought she did. But I was holding the deed. Let me rewind a little. What they didn't know was that 3 months ago, I stumbled across something I wasn't supposed to find. I was working on a freelance web design project for a boutique PR firm. Totally above board, remote gig. Nothing sketchy. Until I opened one of the back-end folders by mistake. Inside were files tied to a scandal cleanup job. A rich family had hired the PR firm to scrub mentions of an affair, possible assault allegations, and hush money payouts from a wealthy heir's record before a wedding. The heir Christopher. The allegations. From his ex, the hush money, real. The wedding. 2 months away. I didn't tell anyone. Not right away. I read the emails, the payout logs, the press suppression strategies. I saw Elena's name listed in one of the problem areas to contain. A note beside it read, "Bride, unaware. Keep narrative clean until event." I felt my throat tighten when I read that. Because for all her favoritism, for all the neglect and betrayal, Elena was being lied to. And I had a choice. Let her marry a man who had a past soaked in secrets, or let the truth ruin her perfect day. It wasn't revenge, it was justice, and yes, maybe a little revenge to the wedding. I waited until the final toast, the one where Elena's father, the same man who handed me $2, stood up and tapped his glass. He began talking about legacy, about love, about welcoming Christopher into our family. He choked up halfway through, and that's when I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I just said 4 words. Clearly and calmly. "Elena, check your phone." The room stilled. Elena blinked. "What?" "Check your phone," I repeated. "Now." Confused murmurs. Elena slowly pulled her phone from the table, unlocked it, and looked at the screen. Because I'd scheduled an anonymous email, one that would hit her inbox the moment the clock struck 8 p.m. Subject line, "Before you say I do." It contained everything: the payout receipts, the PR logs, screenshots of Christopher's emails, even photos of him with his ex-Dems stamped, just 3 weeks before the proposal. She didn't move for nearly a full minute. Then she stood, without a word. She turned to Christopher, slapped him so hard, the sound echoed like a firecracker. The entire tent went silent. Elena looked at my parents. "You knew." My father opened his mouth, closed it. My mother stared at the tablecloth, and I picked up my glass of water, took a sip, and walked out. Outside, the stars were starting to appear. It was quiet, peaceful. I didn't look back. Not even when I heard shouting behind me. Not when guests began filing out, confused. Not when Christopher screamed something about lies. Because I knew what I'd done. I hadn't ruined the wedding. I'd rescued it. I'd rescued Elena from a lifetime of silence. The same kind of silence they'd fed me for years. That night, I slept in a motel 30 miles away. I left my phone on, but no one called. And that was okay, because for the first time in 24 years, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't waiting for a thank you. I wasn't waiting to be seen. I already was. The next morning, my inbox was flooded. Not with apologies, with gossip, mutual acquaintances, distant cousins, people who had ignored me at the wedding. Everyone suddenly had something to say. "Is it true? Was it really you who sent that?" Elena left him at the altar. But I ignored all of them. I didn't need their noise. Instead, I booked a week-long stay at a quiet lakeside cabin 2 hours away. No Wi-Fi, no distractions. Just me, a few books, and a clear mind. It was there, sitting on the edge of a wooden dock, toes in the water, that I allowed myself to breathe. And for the first time in years, I felt light. On the 3rd day, Elena called, not texted. Called. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Her voice was quiet, raw. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I swallowed. "Would you have believed me?" A pause. "No," she admitted. "Not then." We sat in silence. She finally broke it. "You saved me." "I wasn't trying to save you," I said. "I was trying to wake you up." Another pause. "Still, you did." She told me everything. How she confronted Christopher, How he denied it until he couldn't anymore. How her father tried to suppress it, said it was old news and boys will be boys. How her mother wept not because her daughter had been deceived, but because the press would tear them apart. I walked out, Alina said. Right. In the middle of it all. I left the ring on the table and told them I'd see them when they learned what real love meant. I didn't say anything, there was nothing more to add. She'd found her spine. When I returned to the city, a week later, I was different, not in looks. In presence, I walked taller. I spoke with intention, and people noticed. The same people who had forgotten I existed were suddenly checking in. My parents sent flowers, a peace offering, wrapped in lilies and guilt. Alina dropped by unannounced. One afternoon with ice cream and a movie. We didn't talk about the wedding. We just existed, like two women finally seeing each other without filters. For a while. It was peaceful, but peace doesn't last forever. 3 weeks later, I received a letter. Not an email, a handwritten envelope. Cream-colored. Embossed. The handwriting was sharp. Familiar. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper. It read, "You've made enemies. Some things don't stay buried. Watch your back." See no signature. Just that initial dot. Christopher. It was both a threat and a promise. I should have been scared, but instead, I smiled, because I hadn't buried the truth. I'd planted it, and it was about to bloom. That night, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it, Echoes. Inside, I began compiling everything I knew. Not just about Christopher, about others like him. Names from those PR files. Families that buried scandals under money and press releases. Victims silenced. Staff paid off. Reporters threatened. I wasn't just going to expose Christopher. I was going to burn the whole rotten system down. Over the next few months, I worked in secret. I created a new identity online. Encrypted accounts, VPNs, a burner phone. I posed as a whistleblower, leaking anonymous tips to investigative journalists. One by one, the dominoes began to fall. A senator's affair with a campaign intern, a tech CEO's harassment lawsuits, a fashion mogul's hush fund, and quietly, always quietly, I traced it all back to the same firm that once hired me as a freelancer, the PR firm that cleaned up Christopher's mess. They weren't just protecting reputations, they were enabling predators. It all came to a head on a rainy Wednesday. I was on my way to a cafe when a man approached me, mid-30s, expensive coat, no umbrella. "You're Matilda, right?" I hesitated. "Who's asking?" He handed me a card. FBI. My heart stuttered, but he smiled, disarmingly. "We're not here to arrest you. We're here to thank you." I blinked. What? "We've been trying to crack into a network of criminal cover-ups tied to elite families, corporations, and political figures. Your leaks. They've given us the map." I was stunned. He continued. "We'd like your help. Off the record, think of it as redemption." I didn't need redemption, but I did want justice, so I nodded, and just like that, I became something more than a forgotten girl at a wedding. I became a ghost in the machine. From that point on, my life split in two. By day, I worked as a quiet UX designer at a mid-tier agency. By night, I was an informant. I had aliases, safe houses, burner accounts. I wasn't famous. I wasn't rich, but I was powerful. Because truth, when wielded right, is a weapon more dangerous than any bullet. Then came the night. Someone broke into my apartment. I was out grabbing groceries when I returned. The lock was picked, drawers open, laptop missing. They didn't take money, just my work, and they left one thing on the kitchen table, a single photo of me, taken from across the street, scrawled on the back. Stop digging. I didn't sleep that night, but not out of fear, out of resolve. They'd drawn first blood. Now it was my turn. The next morning, I met with Alina. She knew something was off the moment she saw me. What happened? I slid the photo across the table. Her hands trembled as she turned it over. This is serious, Matilda. I know. Are you safe? I didn't answer. Safety wasn't the point anymore. Silence was how people like Christopher survived. And I wasn't going to be silent. We put our heads together. Alina had begun rebuilding her life too. She'd started therapy, cut ties with her father's firm, and joined a women's rights NGO as a legal advisor. Together, we decided to take everything public, but not through gossip sites, through testimony. We arranged a joint interview with a major investigative channel, not just our story, but stories of others, backed by documents, timelines, and connections. The night before the interview, I couldn't sleep. Not from nerves, from clarity. I knew that once I stepped into that studio, there would be no going back. The interview aired 3 days later. It was raw, unfiltered, powerful. Viewers heard Elena's confession. They saw me read excerpts from the file's redacted names, blacked out payments, hush agreements. But most importantly, they saw that we weren't just victims. We were women who fought back. Within hours, the video went viral. Comments flooded in, some supportive, some threatening, but it didn't matter because the silence had been broken. Investigations reopened, lawsuits filed, executives stepped down, the PR firm that once buried truths was subpoenaed, and Christopher, he fled the country. But it didn't save him. Interpol issued a red notice after a whistleblower from his own company came forward. Turns out, tax fraud was the least of his crimes. They caught him in Portugal. Extradited. Alina and I watched his trial from the back row. He looked at us once. I didn't blink. Alina didn't flinch. He knew we'd won. After the trial, we walked outside into the blinding sun. Reporters swarmed, flashbulbs popped, microphones extended. One of them shouted, "Matilda, what would you say to girls who feel powerless?" I paused, then leaned in and said, "You're not powerless. You've just been taught to think you are." That quote ended up on magazines, billboards, even classroom posters. But fame was never the goal. Truth was. Months passed, the world moved on as it always does. But I didn't fade. I used the momentum to build something real, a nonprofit that protected whistleblowers. We offered encrypted reporting tools, legal aid, therapy, everything I once needed but didn't have. And I called it the Echo Project. Because every truth echoes, even after it's spoken, especially then. One evening, I stood in front of a full hall at a university, speaking to a new generation of students, activists, journalists, programmers, survivors. I looked into their eyes and saw a fire I recognized. I ended my talk with this: they tried to silence me with $2. They underestimated what I was worth. But I didn't burn quietly. I became the match. Afterward, a girl came up to me, burly, 19, nervous hands, brave eyes. She whispered, "I'm scared to speak up about something happening in my company." I took her hand and said, "Then let me help you," because I remembered what it felt like to be unheard, and I'd vowed that no one else would feel that alone. Again, Alina and I remained close. We weren't the same girls who met in the back row of a literature class years ago. We were stronger, sharper, aligned. And though our scars ran deep, they reminded us we survived. No. We rose. Years later, as I walked into the headquarters of the Echo Project, walls lined with testimonials, awards, letters, I paused at the front desk. A new volunteer greeted me. "Are you Matilda?" she asked. Starstruck, I smiled. "Yes. But I'm just part of the story." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" I gestured around us. "Everyone who speaks up is part of it now." That night, I wrote one final line in my journal. They thought they'd end me. But I was just beginning.